All thoughts and opinions expressed on WRHU's Queerly Informed do not reflect the views of Hofstra University, the Board of Trustees, or Radio Hofstra University. All contrasting thoughts or suggestions can be sent to programming at wrhu.org or to Room 127 Herbert Hall, 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
Welcome to the fourth installation of Season 3 of Queerly Informed.
I'm Savaria.
And I'm Camryn Bowden.
And we'll have the latest in international, national, and local LGBTQ news.
West Hollywood and Fire Island face backlash over lowering their flags to half-mast following Charlie Kirk's killing.
President Donald Trump says he wishes to remove all pride flags.
The Michigan legislature passes a ban on all porn and portrayals of trans people.
And more.
In queer entertainment, I'm Matt Fisher with more on Queer Emmy wins, Pedro and Lux Pascal, and Elon Musk's estranged daughter's New York Fashion Week debut.
For gay history, I am Brooklyn Dottin. We have more on Bi Visibility Week. Stay tuned to find out more.
For your Queerly Informed Sports Report, I'm Kaycee Kotun with more on the WNBA's Rookie of the Year.
Thank you for joining us today. Let's get into the headlines. Many LGBTQ+ and transgender pride flags were lowered to half-mast in West Hollywood and Fire Island in observance of Charlie Kirk's passing. This is in accordance to a proclamation from President Trump on September 10th, stating flags on public grounds must be flown at half-mast until September 14th. Many locals in historically queer neighborhoods of West Hollywood and Fire Island were outraged at their community's compliance. WeHo Times reported that an anonymous resident posted a sign in Matthew Shepard Square where both trans and progress pride flags were lowered. The sign reading, quote, "Shame on West Hollywood for lowering our flags in honor of a racist, transphobic, homophobic, Nazi-loving monster." Citizens on Fire Island were similarly outraged when they saw their city complying with the president's order. The Black and Brown Equity Coalition posted a statement starting with, quote, "We cannot stay silent seeing pride and transgender flags at half-staff on Cherry Grove Dock to honor Charlie Kirk." I think that it's a little unreasonable to have this kind of half-mast flying for the death of Charlie Kirk. Not that he was not an influential person, but the fact that he was simply an influencer, and I don't think the death of an influencer has ever been shown as much respect and dedication as his passing. No one has ever flown a flag for half-mast, even when some of the most influential people of our time have died. I don't believe there was ever this kind of notion from especially the president that things must be put at half-mast. Obviously, people are entitled to fly their flags at half-mast if they deem it fit, but there's never been a presidential order there's never been a proclamation that says you have to fly these flags at half-mast for the weekend.
Something that came to like a very big surprise to me was hearing it, but it was another thing to see it. When I was driving home that same weekend, I was driving past this really big farm that's it's like on the the New Jersey Turnpike, and there was a huge American flag that was just being flown at half-mast, and I just saw it and I was like, there's no way that they actually did this. He's just a regular person, a random citizen at that has all this, quote, presidential power or influence from the president, if you will.
Yeah, and I think something else like that can be said about this is that similar to what Summer was kind of mentioning, like there have been other, incidents of violence that have been in the exact same capacity, gun crimes committed against political operatives is what I guess the term would be. Specifically, like the Minnesota House Speaker, Melissa Hortman, when she was murdered, President Trump opted to not, call on the country to lower flags to half-mast, despite how brutal and how, kind of vicious the crime was itself. So, it is interesting. And obviously, it's pretty obvious here that President Trump wants, obviously saw Charlie Kirk, very much as like a friend of his and didn't want him to, be ill-remembered, I guess. So it makes sense that this is what President Trump opted to do. But, something can be said about kind of, well, there have been so many other people in this exact same instance where they've been murdered in a very similar way, and they're, kind of being kind of pushed to the wayside in terms of like being respected and recognized in the country. But I think also, kind of the whole anger behind the story is that, Charlie Kirk was a very, anti-LGBTQ plus proponent, or, you know what I mean? He wasn't someone who liked the queer community, who thought the queer community deserved the rights and respect that they duly do. So it makes sense that, like, there are people that are outraged about this, because why in the world would anyone want that, for their community? If they're not being respected by a person, why should the community have to kind of respect them back, if that makes sense? So I guess I kind of get the perspective here, but it is just interesting all in all, considering he wasn't like a former president or someone who was in like the House of Representatives or the Senate, who kind of passed away.
So, it is also worth mentioning that these flags are being flown at half-mast for a civilian. And yes, sure, this particular civilian was very influential, but he spread all sorts of hateful rhetoric and harmful misinformation. I should say disinformation, actually. So why are we flying the flags at half-mast as a show of respect for him, but not doing the same thing for the many civilian victims of mass shootings and all sorts of hate crimes? Like where was this energy for George Floyd or even Breonna Taylor, or like the many victims of the Sandy Hook shooting, or the list could go on. I could keep going.
Yeah, one thing I want to add too is, let's say that, Sarah McBride, who is the U.S. rep for Delaware, was gunned down. Do you think that places with high concentrations of conservatives would willingly fly their flags at half-mast for her? It's a double standard because they expect the left to do that for them, but would the right do that for the left? And I don't think so.
I do want to expand off of Brooklyn's point about the whole Breonna Taylor situation. Breonna Taylor, before she was unlawfully killed, was an EMT, and rightfully so. I believe that Breonna Taylor did way more than Charlie Kirk did for the citizens. She's going out as her job, spent all these times training as an EMT to save these people's lives. When Charlie Kirk sits here on college campuses just spewing hateful rhetoric and just sits there to argue with children all day.
In an Oval Office press spray, President Trump says that he would have no problem removing LGBTQ+ and trans pride flags from display in public areas. Chief White House correspondent of Real America's Voice Network, Brian Glenn, who's also Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's husband, showed President Trump a photo of the Progress Pride flag, which he falsely identified as the trans flag. In showing the photo of the flag along Washington, D.C.'s 14th Street, a strip of predominantly LGBTQ+ businesses, Glenn said, quote, "A lot of people are very threatened by this flag. It means a lot of different negative things to people, violence." And being asked whether he would sue to get the flags taken down, Trump responded by saying, quote, "Well, I wouldn't be, but then they'll sue, and they'll get freedom of speech stuff, so that'll happen, but I would have no problem with it." Trump compared the display of the LGBTQ+ pride flag to those who burn the American flag, which is constitutionally protected speech that Trump tried to outlaw in an executive order last month. Glenn also urged the president to label those who hang this flag up as members of a domestic terror group. So I think kind of the very obvious point here is kind of all of this action behind, LGBTQ plus pride flags and like all of this stuff against the queer community and really public displays of the queer community and queer life and queer identity. It's like all of this for just some flags. I mean, like, I feel like for so long, the conservative movement wanted to label like liberal groups as snowflakes because of like all of these, kind of like social issues, these quote unquote fringe issues, according to them. All of a sudden, like now you're, trying to completely get all flags taken down and all this kind of stuff. Like it just feels like who's really like the snowflake now? You know what I mean? Like it's just this kind of changing of the dynamic where it's like, what once was like conservatives being like, oh, this is, I can't believe you're, so blah, 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 blah. I can't believe this is what you're kind of defending, yada, yada, yada. All of a sudden, it's like, well, now, who's in the hot button seat where they're the ones having to kind of try and fight back against that, if that makes sense.
From what I have seen, at least, issues that conservatives deem as basically important, such as pride flags being flown, apparently, are the stuff that they consider to be important are not, in fact, quote-unquote snowflake or fringe issues to them. And on the flip side, any social issues that the left, that people on the left basically finds to be important, the right for LGBTQ plus people to exist, is that is what they consider quote unquote fringe or unimportant or non-issues. So I just kind of think that I just cannot help thinking that the whole snowflake thing is kind of a dog whistle for stuff that conservatives are threatened by.
If I'm fine with them taking away all pride flags if, and really, really big emphasis on if, they take down every Confederate flag, because that flag's also very offensive to minorities in the U.S. too. And obviously I'm joking with what I said, but there is this double standard like I mentioned earlier, because if you want the pride flag taken down because it's offensive to you, why are you okay keeping up the Confederate flag that has been used as a symbol of hate and racism for over 100 years? I don't really understand.
On September 11th, Michigan Republican State Representative Josh Shriver proposed an online pornography ban in an attempt to prohibit adult material along with any, quote, depiction, description, or simulation of trans people. The Anti-Corruption of Public Morals Act, or Bill 4938, would prohibit the distribution of all, quote, real, animated, digitally generated, written, or auditory pornography online, with exceptions for scientific, medical research, or instruction. The ban also has a small caveat that would affect trans people directly, with Bill 4938 banning content which includes a disconnection between biology and gender by an individual of one sex imitating himself or herself to be of the other biological sex. The bill would force internet providers within Michigan to implement filtering technology preventing residents in the state from viewing pornography, lest they face a fine worth $500,000. Violators of the ban could face a felony charge punishable by a $100,000 fine, up to 20 years in prison, or both. And then individuals whose violation involves more than 100 pieces of prohibited materials would face 25 years prison time and or a $125,000 fine.
Yeah, this one's interesting to me because part of me feels like they're banning it out of their own temptation. I think that's a common theme we see with a lot of conservatives when it comes to dealing with pornography depicting either homosexual relations or pornography featuring trans people. A part of me can't help but wonder if that hate is really stemming from religious beliefs or if it's stemming from their, personal desires and their temptation to view this content. And it's almost a situation where as if they ban it for everybody, they themselves won't be tempted, and they won't be who they fear the most, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really do agree with what you said about banning it on their personal temptations, because I don't know if you guys remember back in 2024 with the RNC, in Milwaukee when they had the abundance of users log on to Grindr. I truly do believe that these men are trying to ban all this stuff because of their own temptation, because they want to keep up this image of, these God-fearing men, these masculine men, when in hindsight, when they're all together, they're trying to do exactly what they're trying to ban.
Next up, we have our entertainment and history reports with Matt Fisher and Brooklyn Dottin.
Last week, Los Angeles' Peacock Theater hosted the 77th Annual Emmy Awards. The star-studded night boasted several wins for members of the LGBTQ+ community. Openly gay Severance star Tremel Tillman made history as the first black man to win an Emmy for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama. When the 40-year-old actor walked on stage to accept his award, an on-screen graphic said he'd like to thank, quote, family, both biological and chosen. Hack star Hannah Einbinder won Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series. On stage, she wore an Artists for Ceasefire pin and ended her acceptance speech saying, quote, Go Birds, F ICE, and Free Palestine. Openly queer star Alan Cumming wore a trans pride pin while accepting his award for Outstanding Reality Host and Outstanding Competition Program. The now 4-time Emmy winner hosts the Peacock competition series The Traitors and acknowledged during his acceptance speech how the show can bring happiness in the middle of hard times.
It's a difficult time we live in, but it's so great that our show brings a little bit of joy into this life.
And while RuPaul's Drag Race didn't walk home with any wins, the queens from its 17th season made a mark on the carpet. Corey King, who's become known for parodying other queens and pop culture characters on Cameo, showed up dressed as Michael Jackson. Tennessee native Harmona Lisa walked the carpet in a Miss Piggy-inspired look, and Joella, the self-proclaimed Salesian diva of LA, dressed up as a, quote, Salesian Labubu. In other TV news, during a recent interview with Elle, Pedro Pascal and his transgender sister Lux Pascal discussed the challenges trans actors face in the industry. The conversation happened as Lux is gearing up to make her lead film debut in Miss Carbon, a biopic about a real trans woman named Kalia Rodriguez, who became the first female coal miner in her hometown in Argentina. When discussing her first time meeting Rodriguez, Pascal spoke about how trans actors are expected to connect with other trans subjects based solely on their identity instead of the many other aspects of their humanity. She said, quote, "It's kind of degrading when people say, oh, you have so much in common, when referring to meeting another trans person," and added, quote, "The dignity of transness is that we get to be different individuals, we have different stories, and connect through other places that we have in common." Pedro supported his sister, saying, quote, "The obvious way of connecting the two of you is one of an entire collage of things that make you completely different." And finally, the estranged daughter of billionaire Elon Musk, Vivian Jenna Wilson, made her New York Fashion Week debut while walking in Alexis Bittar's Spring-Summer 2026 runway show. The theme was Miss USA in 1991, a dream sequence, and the daughter of the billionaire and his ex-wife, Justine Wilson, wore a sparkling red dress and sash reading Miss South Carolina. According to the Brooklyn-based designer, each model represented a state where trans rights are being stripped away, saying, quote, "It's a story about misogyny, unchecked predators, objectification, and trans rights." For your queerly informed entertainment break, I'm Matt Fisher.
On this day in 1999, 3 bisexual activists established Bi Visibility Day. Wendy Curry from Maine, Gigi Raven Wilbur from Texas, and Michael Page from Florida, who was also known for creating the Bi flag, kickstarted the now annual September 23rd celebration. It was initially known as International Celebrate Bisexuality Day and has been known by a few different names, including Bi Day, Bi Pride Day, and Celebrate Bisexuality Day. However, the current name of Bi Visibility Day was coined by bi community activist from the UK, Jen Yochney, and gained traction across Europe before catching on with the rest of the world. The list of countries observing this day has grown to over 30 since 1999. For your queerly informed history lesson, I am Brooklyn Dottin.
Thank you to Matt Fisher and Brooklyn Dottin for those reports.
Welcome to this week's Trans News Break.
The Federal Bureau of Investigations is reportedly preparing to classify transgender people as violent extremists, something that was included in the far-right Project 2025 proposal from the Heritage Foundation.
Independent journalist Ken Klippenstein found through 2 anonymous officials that the Bureau is discussing categorizing trans people under the new label of nihilistic violent extremists.
The new classification is marked by, quote, criminal conduct in furtherance of political, social, or religious goals that derive primarily from a hatred of society at large and a desire to bring about its collapse by sowing indiscriminate chaos.
2 Republican legislators have called for all trans people to be institutionalized in the wake of the killing of Charlie Kirk, the latest move towards furthering President Trump's anti-trans agenda.
South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace, who's been in the spotlight over her use of the T-slur against transgender people, circulated a false claim that the bullets used by alleged killer Tyler Robinson had transgender engravings on them.
Texas Representative Ronnie Jackson echoed similar statements to Newsmax, where he was asked if bringing back mental institutions was something the Republican House would consider, which Jackson responded with a list of falsities about trans people and hormone replacement therapy.
According to Utah Governor Spencer Cox, the trans roommate and alleged romantic partner of alleged Charlie Kirk shooter Tyler Robinson says that she did not know about the shooting.
In a text conversation that was released in an initial filing, the trans roommate asks, "What? You're joking, right? You weren't the one who did it, right? And how long have you been planning this?"
Robinson is charged with aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, and felony discharge of a firearm, and appeared in court on September 16th, entering a plea of not guilty to the charges.
Fox News host Rachel Campos Duffy has claimed that hormone replacement therapy and gender-affirming care is what caused the alleged Charlie Kirk shooter Robinson to kill him.
On Fox and Friends, Campos Duffy talked about the killing of Kirk and the shooting at Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis, saying, quote, "We can't forget about the children who were gunned down while attending Mass, and we saw that, in the end, that was also a trans shooter."
She also proceeded to say, quote, "Here's the problem I have. A lot of people are indoctrinated with leftist ideology, but that's a bridge too far to obviously take to a level of violence, and that's where I wonder if there is a nexus between not just this ideology, but also his community, or even some of the drugs they take in order to trans. What do those drugs do to their body, their minds?"
In a recent New York Times Siena College poll, current New York City Mayor Eric Adams placed last and has since changed his perspective on transgender bathroom policies in New York City's education system.
In a September 17th press conference, Adams said, quote, "I'm not for boys going into the same bathroom as little girls." Following this, in another press conference, he said, quote, "My utmost importance is to ensure that when my children are in school, they're in there in a safe environment, and I do not believe a safe environment is allowing boys and girls to use the same bathroom facility at the same time."
The mayor plans to look into his authority and power to change policies passed by the New York City Department of Education that says students must be able to access facilities that match their gender identity.
And ending off on some good news, the Maine Principals Association is refusing to comply with Department of Justice request for all student-athlete information to root out transgender people.
The DOJ has been fighting with the state since April after suing the Maine Department of Education, which the Trump administration alleges violated Title IX sex discrimination practices by allowing transgender students, athletes, to play.
The MPA, which is not a part of the lawsuit, was subpoenaed to give all information on student athletes to validate the Trump administration's lawsuit, which the MPA refuses to comply with.
So I wanted to start off this conversation because with one pretty staggering, pretty scary statistic. There is a group of online independent journalists who are essentially tracking all of the legislative and executive order action from President Trump and the White House itself. And have found that 47% of the proposals listed in Project 2025 have been completed about 8 months into President Trump's second term. So we're talking about almost half of the entirety of Project 2025 has been kind of, finished. And there's still like a lot of the bigger picture stuff, some of the more difficult things for the Trump administration to do, kind of next in line in terms of the things that still need to be done in terms of Project 2025. But I think it's really staggering for, a candidate who said that he did not know what Project 2025 was and didn't think that it was anything, it's pretty staggering that about half of the entirety of Project 2025 is finished. Not to mention things like recently Jimmy Kimmel's show being taken off of air. That was something that was kind of listed in Brendan Carr's perspective when he was writing about the FCC and things that the FCC should kind of regulate and work on. So, pretty scary, pretty, visible stuff here in terms of Republicans trying to get rid of perspectives and viewpoints and even institutions that they don't necessarily agree with.
Something that really did bother me with this whole situation about Charlie Kirk is that the instant jump to try to blame the left. I feel like with this whole situation that has happened, they've been trying to nitpick any sort of ideology or any sort of part of the shooter's life that would most likely align with the more of like the left-leaning values and use that to try and break him down. Like especially going as far as saying that there's trans engravings on the bullets, or even like instantly saying, "Oh, it has to be a trans person that did this," when there was no confirmed shooter yet. Like I feel like we've gotten to a point where if anything happens with let's say the Republican Party, or anything that happens with someone that isn't, let's say, right leaning, they instantly try to blame the left, no matter what it is. Like they instantly try to go and defend themselves with the basis of, "Oh well, the left ...
That's a good point that you bring up, and I think that just to kind of accentuate that point, we see a lot of this focus on Tyler Robinson's roommate and how they are transgender, and specifically the relationship they may or may not have had with Robinson. This is a classic. I think this is a classic example of just catching on to whatever you can. You're just trying to grab it. You're falling and you're trying to just grab whatever tree branch you can. If his roommate was not trans, they would have found, he searched up transgender one time. Maybe he had a trans friend. Maybe he used to have a trans friend. They would snag onto whatever even as small a tie as they could to the idea of this was influenced by trans people. And I think that it goes so far as to, like you said, we initially thought that there were transgender engravings on the bullets. What does that even mean? How do you engrave a bullet with transgender ideologies? There's no, even then, you could write whatever on a bullet. It doesn't matter. And I think that this is just trying to attack trans people with whatever little evidence that they can.
Something, though, that I will say that's, kind of some good news is obviously the Maine Department of Education, the Maine Principals Association, standing up to the Trump administration and, their, requests for information about all student athletes so they can kind of root out the trans ones. It's good to see, people in positions of power, specifically principals and educators, trying to stand up for their students' rights. I think that ultimately makes out to be, the really important aspect of, the goal of educators are to protect the children that they're teaching and to teach them how to, kind of be able to work with one another and be able to live and exist in the same society and, places one another. Maybe you don't agree fully with it. Maybe you don't, maybe you're confused about what trans people are, who, what that means, things like that. But at least, kind of seeing people trying to make a stand, trying to stand up and say, you know what, no, like this is not okay. I feel like that kind of stuff I'm grateful to see, kind of a concerted effort to try and protect those people from the perspective of educators. Before we end off our show, here's Kaycee Kotun with your Queerly Informed Sports Report.
On September 16th, UConn star Paige Beckers was named the WNBA Rookie of the Year. Paige Beckers, a guard for the Dallas Wings, became the first queer person in franchise history to win this award. Beckers averaged around 20 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists per game, and 2 steals, causing the Dallas Star to gain 70 out of the 72 votes for Rookie of the Year. Beckers scored 44 points in a devastating loss to the Los Angeles Sparks in August, the highest point total in all of the season and also most ever by a rookie. She also became the first player in league history to score 40 or more points while shooting 80% in a game. This is just the beginning for Dallas's rising rookie. There's a long road ahead for the 22-year-old point guard as she builds her career and steps on that ladder to become one of the WNBA's most famous superstars.
So I wanted to start off with this kind of conversation just behind the WNBA as a whole. The WNBA is growing in size. It's growing in kind of stature within the sports, industry and the sports broadcasting world. A lot of people have started to flock to the WNBA because it acts on a schedule where it kind of overlaps a little bit with the NBA, but it allows for people to be able to consume the NBA, but also the WNBA at different points throughout the year. So it allows the NBA as a whole, the National Basketball Association, to sort of be recognized as a full year-round kind of institution in terms of the sports world. But the WNBA itself has a lot of issues in terms of pay equity, in terms of representation, in terms of, size of the teams and size of the amount of teams that are in the country in the first place or that are in the league in the first place. So, there's a lot of kind of different aspects here. But Paige Beckers getting recognized as Rookie of the Year is a pretty spectacular thing because she is queer. She is visibly queer. She has a girlfriend. She's very proud about that fact. And for a league that is growing in such size and stature and such, kind of positioning within the sports world, it's good to see kind of queer, players, queer, athletes being recognized for their talents and being recognized that, I feel like it just pushes even more inclusivity in the fact that, like, okay, like, people are, maybe they are, like, not, maybe they like, it allows people who are queer, who are, of different minority backgrounds to be recognized, like, and be more included within kind of, like, what mainstream sports is kind of, like, viewed as, I think.
I think this is such a great story. The fact that like you said, a visibly queer player getting 70 of 72 votes for Rookie of the Year, that is some incredible stuff. Breaking records, being the first player. Definitely just smacked the mic, sorry. And also, sorry, Alex. Becoming the first player in league history to score 40 or more points while shooting 80% in a game. This is some incredible work. Not just that she's putting in on the basketball court, but the fact that she's putting in this work as a visibly queer person, kind of forcing herself into the limelight, forcing queerness into the limelight, I think is some incredible work, some incredible things. Maybe she's not, I'm sure she's not doing that, consciously. She's just focused on being the best player she can be, but it is such an inspiration to so many young queer people out there to see this kind of, this greatness and, Yeah, keep up the great work, Miss Beckers.
For your Queerly Informed Sports Report, I'm Kaycee Kotun.
Thank you for tuning into Queerly Informed this week here on 88.7 FM Radio, Hofstra University, Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thank you to the entire Queerly Informed team for your work on this week's edition.
Join us back here next week to hear the latest in queer news, as well as commentary from our group of LGBTQ reporters.
As always, if you have any suggestions for stories or content that you'd like to hear, send them our way through email at queerlyinformedwrhu@gmail.com.
Thank you again to our entertainment reporter today, Matt Fisher, our historian, Brooklyn Dottin, and our sports reporter, Kaycee Kotun, for their work on today's show.
For Queerly Informed, I'm Camryn Bowden.
And I'm Summer Savaria.
Thank you for tuning in.